So why did I decide to go get a doctorate, right? Well, one of the trends that I've been noticing for a long time is how customer experience metrics are falling. This has been coming through the research from Forrester for the past like 3 to 4 years. Um, and what's interesting about it is that most executives do know that a customer-centric company makes more money. So this doesn't make any sense. Why are the metrics falling when executives know that if you're a customer-centric company, you make more money? Well, there's a few paradoxes, I think, that happen in this space. I think a great example is always customer service or customer support, right? A customer calls a company because they have a problem. They are not having a good experience. If the company solves the problem, right, then this peak end rule situation happens, right, where a customer is going to remember the most emotionally charged point in time and the end, right? Because we can't remember all the emotions that go on in any type of experience. We tend to, our brains will concatenate them to a mixture of those two areas, peak end rule. And a customer will remember, gee, they solved my problem, right? That's the most emotionally charged, right? That this is great. That's how this all ended up. And then they become a loyal customer. But in a lot of, but when you think all case facts considered, they shouldn't be, right? If you really think about it, they should not be a loyal customer because they had a problem. But the company solved it and the customer felt great. So now you start to think maybe this is all about emotions. Well, I'm really curious about what happens at the front. How do these relationships form? And instead of looking at the consumer side with brand connection and things like that, I know there's a lot of emotion that's involved there. I want to look at the B2B space. When someone on the B2B side decides that they need a digital transformation product, I know it's just what I know. So they decide they want that product and they call sales. What happens from when they talk to sales to when they decide to buy? And how does that relationship get built? Because what I find really interesting about companies and customers is that companies have the goal that they want to make money, right? They want to sell their widget, whatever, right? Service, whatever, what have you. And the customer wants to solve a problem. So those two goals are kind of at odds with each other, right? They don't that so that doesn't really make sense. How a company sells anything is really quite mysterious if you really think about it. Because a customer wants to solve a problem, company has a solution, but they're looking to sell, right? So this is kind of interesting. There's a lot of asymmetry. There's a lot going on about expectations and what this experience is like and how does this all work. And what I find really interesting that happens in the literature is in the academic literature for the past 30, 40, 50 years, um, there's been a lot of focus on relationship building in businesses. And there's been a recognition that businesses are about people, right? A business is kind of like this type of community almost, right? And that's the word I've been kind of using for a long time. It's a type of community. It's a gathering of people working together to achieve a goal. Um, what's really interesting about some of the academic literature is it starts to compare a business to a family. I really wish places wouldn't do this. A business is not a family. A family has a lot of different dynamics, and there's also this element of an expectation to stay. And with a business, that's not true, right? I think also sometimes in business, when we hear relationships with colleagues or relationships with customers, or we start to think in terms of friends or romantic relationships, right? Like, so two companies coming together, yes, we often say the word marriage, right? Because it's a great analogy, but that's not what's happening. When two people get married, that's not the same as two companies becoming partners. That's not the same. There's similarities, but it is not the same. They're very different. Same with two companies coming together. It's not like they become friends. Becoming friends is a great analogy, but that's not really what's happening. I recently came across this theory, resource dependence theory, and what kind of makes sense about this is it describes a business as a coalition and people in there have solidarity. I think that's a much better analogy for how this works, or much better description. Maybe not an analogy because we're not really abstracting this out. This is just a description for how a business works. But anyway, that's what I want to try to figure out. What is happening within building that initial relationship between a customer and a company, or let's say a buying team and a supplier salesperson. What is happening in that exchange or in those interactions or in those engagements, right? That builds that relationship. And what does that relationship actually look like? Because I think knowing that is going to set the stage and start to define metrics and an understanding of kind of what a company is and kind of what does this relationship look like and what is a good customer experience relationship. What does that actually look like in tangible forms, right? We think we know, right? And we push some of our ideals onto that, but what is it really? And that's what I want to look at.